Post-traumatic stress disorder is very real. You know, people who experience trauma of any sort, whether it's military service or a traumatic event, can have flashbacks, can have extreme stress and anxiety responses that are far beyond what anybody who's never experienced that kind of stress can experience.
So like flashbacks, does it take them back to where they were, actually?
In some cases, the flashbacks are literally that. Takes them back to where they were. They lose track of their actual present situation. But at other times, flashbacks can be almost imaginary. That is, you're taken to another place altogether, and you're responding to outside stimuli. Sometimes it's just an extreme anxiety that is not really consistent with what you're actually experiencing at that moment. It's an extreme reaction.
So, like a guy who's been to Iraq and you know, seen some horrible things. Like his wife says, I can't even get too close to another car. Like if I get boxed in the cars, my husband will just start sweating and freaking out. Is that consistent?
Yeah, you know, we hear that type of story all the time from people who have been overseas. Part of the protective mechanism when you're in a war zone is to protect your space. And so when people that have been in the military especially feel confined, they feel threatened. And that sense of threat isn't something that you can just let go of just because you're transferred out of a war zone into your own suburb. That stays with you for a long time, sometimes your whole life. And it's very easy to begin to relive those moments through your own anxiety. You may not feel like you're there, but you have the feeling inside as if you were there.
And if, she'll describe like helicopters or even an airplane goes over the house and he shuts down. Sometimes for a couple days before he's like normal again.
Yeah, you know, it's the range of things that people can. The range of things that people can experience with post-traumatic stress disorder is enormous. Anything from mild symptoms to extreme symptoms with just the slightest trigger. So everyone is a little bit different, but it has to be taken very seriously because it has real-world consequences, not only in the way they interact with loved ones, with people around them, but also in the way that they respond to things. People with PTSD do not respond to reaction. People with PTSD do not respond to situations the way that someone might be expected to if they didn't have PTSD.
And so a traffic stop, for instance, might create a real problem for someone with PTSD.
Yeah, you know, if somebody felt crowded, if someone felt threatened, their reaction is going to be magnified. And it's going to be magnified in a way that, if you're interacting with law enforcement, may actually feel threatening to the law enforcement officer. And that's why it's really important that everyone kind of be on the same page and know what the parameters are, because otherwise the interactions can escalate very quickly.
So if you know someone has PTSD, like for instance this guy's wife, she obviously knows, and she feels like there's a way to deal with him when he's going through this, a way to talk to him. Do they find that that's genuinely true?
Yeah, having an understanding or having some insight of having an understanding or insight into what triggers someone's behaviors when they have PTSD is really important, because you can hopefully avoid it. Now, for outside people who don't know that person, they don't know their triggers, and so you have to be sensitive to it. If they tell you that they've experienced trauma in the past, military or otherwise, you need to be aware that maybe they have a trigger that's going to set them off in a different direction, and hopefully be understanding and accommodating of that.
Some police departments actually have everyone go through training for PTSD. Some because a lot of police officers have former military and may just have PTSD from their work. But why would they do that? I mean, can it really make a difference in your interactions with people at a traffic stop? Well,
you know, anytime someone who's experienced trauma in the past gets re-exposed in a way that could what's the way I want to say this? Anytime someone that's experienced trauma in the past experiences a threat, it's a sense of threat to yourself that causes a trigger sometimes in people that have had trauma in the past. And even something as simple as a traffic stop or an interaction with law enforcement, that can trigger a threat. because you don't know what's going to happen. And that threat quickly escalates because then you behave differently. Then the officer has to behave differently. And then you behave more differently. And so on and so on. And the situation can get out of control very quickly unless someone breaks that cycle. And for the person that has post-traumatic stress, it's difficult for them to break the cycle. So it's important for someone else to understand and to maybe begin to separate themselves and to maybe de-escalate the situation.
So if a police officer had training and they recognize this might be someone with PTSD, they might be able to act in a way that makes everything a little safer.
Right. You know, PTSD is just like any other mental health disorder. If you know you're dealing with somebody that has an extreme psychosis and isn't seeing reality the same way, as a police officer, as a healthcare worker, I try and basically help that person cope so they don't feel more threatened and so the situation doesn't get worse.
And what if you have no training at all and you just come across someone and you're already in a tense situation? You're a police officer, which you know is, you can sit there, which you're already tense in situation. If you have no training, that could go pretty badly, couldn't it?
Oh yeah, you know, without training, when you're dealing with somebody with an extreme mental health disorder where they may be experiencing outside stimuli or reacting to things that aren't there, it escalates very quickly because your responses are disproportionate to their responses and you think that they're making stuff up and they're not. And so they think that you're not listening to them and then it just gets out of control.
Good idea. This particular guy, his wife actually did all this. He doesn't drive, but just because she does drive, she has a license plate that says Marine and thing, and he wears a jacket that says Marine, and there's like some sort of notification to let people know, well, hey, this guy has served, and maybe. Are things like that a good idea, or a bracelet, or a thing, or is there anything you can do?
I wish there was some way that we could identify people who have genuine post-traumatic stress, because not everyone that's been exposed in military combat does have PTSD. But for those who genuinely do, it's important that they get the word out to whoever is interacting with them, so that if something goes south, they respond appropriately, or hopefully can respond so that the situation doesn't get worse. For someone to just identify themselves as having been ex-military, you shouldn't necessarily always jump to the idea that they have PTSD or an extreme form. But if you have some idea that someone is former military and you know that they may have had very bad experiences, being sensitive to that and reacting with that sensitivity can really help preserve a situation and keep it from getting out of control.